My plan reeked of desperation. Well, that's because I was desperate. But I had an amazing coincidence working in my favor. This is chapter 8. The year was 2005, and we were living in northeast San Antonio next to Randolph Air Force Base. On that base, the headquarters for U.S. Air Force's recruiting. How could I pass up that opportunity? Now, thankfully, I was not in the military anymore, or else I could not have taken advantage of this opportunity. This was my plan that completely went around military protocol. I was going to go to the base and just find somebody to talk to get around these recruiters. So that's what I did. The Personnel Center was a large, white, beautiful building in Spanish colonial architecture, and I didn't know where I was going when I parked my car in the parking lot and walked up the steps. I just walked into the building. I started looking around, noticing all the military memorabilia, the familiar looking photographs on the wall. And then I saw an airman coming down the hall, young guy, woodland camouflage fatigues. And I asked him, hey, is there somebody I can talk to here in Officer Accessions? And he goes, oh yeah, I know somebody down the hall here. So he walked me down the hall, and the guy said, he introduced me to another airman. And the guy said, yeah, what can I help you with? And I said, well, I'm trying to find a way to get back into the Air Force on prior service, and trying to see if I can do that without going through a recruiter. And he looked at me like, okay, I don't think there is such a way, but if this guy's crazy enough to walk in here and ask me about that, I don't want to just try to shoo him off. I'll pass him off to somebody bigger. And that's what he did. So he walked me down the hall, and walked into an office that could have been a conference room. And there was a man sitting at the desk with balding hair and glasses, and I could tell that he was a lieutenant colonel. And by looking around at the stuff on his wall, I figured this guy's probably the boss of that senior master sergeant, the one who told me that I was not getting back into the Air Force. And then this airman introduced me to the colonel. He said, sir, we got a gentleman here. He's looking to get back into the Air Force, and he's trying to see if he can go around recruiters or something to that effect. And of course, that's not really a thing. And so the colonel looked at me, kind of piqued his curiosity, and he asked me to sit down. So I sat down, and he asked me, so what are you trying to do? And I told him that I was fully qualified, and I had a folder of papers here to show that. I told him my backstory, and I told him that I was having trouble getting recruiters to take my package and push it forward. And the colonel said, so you've been up to their office and you've met with them? I said, yes, sir, I have, but they're not interested in taking my case. And then he said, well, did they give you a reason? And I said, yes, they said that they have so many qualified applicants right now, and that my package doesn't really stand out, so it's essentially not a priority to them. He just kind of, And then he moved his chair back over to his phone, and he turned the speakerphone on, and I heard the speed dial dialing. Deet, 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 deet. And then I heard the voice on the other line, and it was the senior master sergeant, the one who told me I wasn't getting back into the military. And the colonel proceeded to ask him a few questions, and then he started saying, so we have a fully qualified applicant here, and you're telling me that your recruiters refused to work with him? And he explained, that they had a lot of qualified applicants. They basically didn't need me, right? There's plenty of people trying to get into the military. And the colonel was like, well, that doesn't matter. He's fully qualified. He's a former airman. You need to get a recruiter on his case, working for him now. And basically, I continued to chew this guy out over the phone. And that was not on my list of expected outcomes for today. While I was grateful that the colonel was taking my case, I was nervous. It was really kind of an uncomfortable atmosphere. And he hangs up the phone and he says, when it comes time, I will do your officer interview, and I will personally make sure that your package makes it to the board. And I was like, wow. On the drive home, as somebody who generally respects good order and discipline, I actually felt a little sorry for the senior master sergeant, thinking about how irritated he must have been with me that I jumped the chain of command and essentially got him in trouble. But I've been backed into a corner, and I was sitting there with a big old school bus steering wheel in front of me, and I had to figure out a way to get around it. So I was excited. I was excited to call my dad and tell him about that. My dad had been just stressed out ever since I told him that I was leaving the military with my pregnant wife without a solid plan. Dad was one who generally trusted very firmly in the system. So I didn't like that I had to tell him that I had to go around the system to try to find a workaround. And I didn't like that for myself either. It felt a little bit, I still felt a little excluded that I was having to find a back door into the castle rather than going up the front steps to the ball, like with everybody that was invited. But I was still excited that this was the sign that I needed. This lieutenant colonel was the godsend to keep me going forward, even though at one point I considered what this recruiter told me that I could just let it all go here. I was carrying such a burden with this uphill task that nobody would have faulted me for throwing in the towel when a recruiter tells me like there's no way I'm getting back into the Air Force. I could have just let it go, but I wasn't ready to, and I'm glad that I didn't. But I still felt a little impulsive. Sometimes I felt a little irresponsible comparing myself to Dad because he knew what I was going through. When he was a young airman with 2 kids in Greece, where I was born, he had wanted to be an officer. He wanted to get commissioned. And then he found out that he had a large melanoma on his back, skin cancer. So that disqualified him from pursuing that route. And even though he didn't like his job, he wasn't satisfied with what he was doing. He was a very capable guy who could have done a lot more than what he was doing. But he chose to stay in the military for the safety and the security of his family. So I did feel like I was being a little reckless and irresponsible with their future. But things were starting to look up now. But there was still another big hurdle. I still had to make it to the board. People still had to decide if they were going to let me in or not. And now I was worried that there was going to be an asterisk on my file. And that was Chapter 8. I hope you'll stick around to see what the board's decision is in Chapter 9. Thanks for watching.